is it bad that I'm genuinely feeling sorry for this guy right now? Like, genuinely feeling sorry for this guy he's just a random defense minister. He's not in charge of the budget, and he's basically been thrown to the lions. He's been torn apart. Fraser Nelson is beating this guy up from the left. Like, that's literally how pathetic, the record of this government is, that anybody who gets put out to genuinely incisive questioning about their record in government is going to get completely embarrassed and humiliated. And I genuinely feel sorry for this guy.
On our panel tonight from the government, Dr. Andrew Morrison is Minister for Defence, People, Veterans and Service Families. He served in the Royal Navy as a...
He looks like Terence Hardiman. I feel like I'm watching The Demon Headmaster.
medic for 18 years, including a 6-month tour of Iraq in 2003. Emily Thornberry was elected to Parliament 18 years ago. She was Shadow Foreign Secretary for 4 years before running unsuccessfully for party leader in 2020. She now shadows what is effectively the government's in-house lawyer, the Attorney General. Helen Morgan is in just her second year as an MP. She won the North Shropshire by-election, overturning centuries of Conservative domination there, taking the Lib Dem tally to 14. She now speaks for her party on levelling up, housing and communities. Fraser Nelson is editor of the right-leaning weekly magazine The Spectator, which has been running for nearly 200 years.
Yeah, just leans to the right. Like, The Spectator just leans to the right in its with such articles like in praise of the Greek neo-Nazi party Golden Dawn, or in praise of, or in defense of the Wehrmacht. Such right-leaning commentary.
He also writes a column for the Daily Telegraph. And Danny Sriskandarajah is the chief executive of Oxfam GB, the charity formed during the Second World War that pledges to end poverty and injustice. In his most recent blog, he said Britain's global reputation as a compassionate, generous nation is draining away. Good evening. Welcome to our panel. Welcome to our audience here in Bristol. And, of course, welcome to you at home as well.
Do I feel like Emily Thornberry would have been better in charge than Starmer? Yes, because she has like some amount of personality that Starmer doesn't have.
As ever on social media, and just to remind you that we are also on iPlayer at 8 o'clock every week, as well as, of course, being after 10 o'clock news on BBC One. So let's get our question. Now, the panel here, split an article of Faith on Question Time. They do not know what the questions are in advance, but let's hear our first one now from our audience, from Chris Blake.
Are the government's plans to house migrants in ex-military bases and potentially vessels a credible alternative to using hotels?
Right, so we've been hearing quite a lot about this this week. Emily, let's kick off with you.
I mean, I don't know what they're doing. I have to say that, you know, it is something which the public takes very seriously. They want to have answers to this, and rightly so, you know, for a whole variety of reasons. But the asylum system is broken, and it was the Conservative Party that broke it. You know, before we left power, there were 14,000 people claiming asylum in the UK waiting for a decision, and now there is 160,000, and it's going up all the time. And what I think they're doing is they're not actually making a serious attempt to try to deal with the issue. I think what they're doing is they're just trying to divide us. They're just trying to distract.
And Zoe Gardner was making this point on Newsnight the other night, essentially saying that the Conservative Party have given up on processing asylum seekers because they don't actually care about reducing the numbers of immigration. They don't care about any of this shit. They just want to use the asylum backlog as a stick to be able to win the next election with, by promising to do something about a problem that they essentially caused themselves by defunding the asylum process to the point at which that we get basically having no people having their asylum claims heard, and then closing all the legal routes so that there had to be some kind of improper means of being able to come to the country. It's an entirely concocted and deliberate crisis. And, of course, the people who bear the brunt of having to deal with the back end of this crisis are working class communities, where these people are being held in hotels at gigantic cost to the taxpayer to try and feed huge amounts of money into the pockets of their mates at Serco. It's so incredibly fucking cynical.
They're just trying to get the headlines, just so that people can start fighting amongst one another, we can start arguing amongst ourselves, and forget that actually what needs to happen is they need to start making some decisions about people who have come here to claim asylum, make those decisions quickly, be firm, be fair, make a decision fast, and get on and move on. It's not fair on the people who come here and claim asylum to be here for... I mean, I think that there are statistics like it's 450 days that you have to wait for a decision to be made if you're an adult. It's 550 days you have to wait if you're a child. child.
But in
And during
terms of
that
the
time,
question,
you live in
Emily-
a hotel and you cannot do anything. You can't.
Let's be fair. It's not 450 days to wait for your asylum claim to be heard if you're a child. It's potentially infinite if you're one of the 200 kids who got fucking lost by the government, which Rob casually batted away the accusations the other week, saying, "Oh, they were just 14 and 15-year-olds." Yeah, they're still fucking children, Dominic. Fucking hell. Tony Abbott and the other Australian Tory ghouls advising them on this policy about 100%, right? It's obviously, LNP stuff.
Can't work. You can't do anything. You just sit there. Your life is suspended, and you wait for a decision to be made. And it is simply wrong, and it's costing the country. It's £8 million a day.
It's £6 million.
£6 million.
But just in terms of it, so I hear what you're saying. So you just think it should be faster, clearly. But in terms of Chris's question, are the government's plans to house migrants in ex-military bases, potentially vessels? That's a credible alternative to using hotels. I haven't heard Labour objecting to that.
Okay. So first of all,
Are you objecting to that?
Yeah. No, first of all, there's not.
I love how these kids have gone missing. There's virtually no news or concerns about this in the public discourse. Yeah, people are literally throwing shit around over transgenderism in schools right now. Yeah, it's pathetic, isn't it? It's absolutely pathetic. It reminds me of that. I think, again, another image of the Conservative Party's reign the reign of terror over the past 13 years. Is that image of that kid, like the dead kid, like his body washed up on the shore on the south coast, and everyone going, "Oh, isn't this terrible?" and then forgetting about it 3 days later. Like that's the level of the discourse, right? Yeah, we continue to have this, the ridiculous, continual conversations over some things that are completely nonsensical in comparison to the gigantic lack of humanity that are being shown to desperate people fleeing. Quite frankly, the poor outcomes of our terrible foreign policy decisions over the past 40 years.
I mean, it's not as though they're saying that it's going to be an alternative. It's going to be an add-on. It's not like, and when we've asked questions about this, they're not going to be moving people out of the hotels and putting them in the army bases or in some sort of ship somewhere. It's an add-on to all the hotels that already use. The answer to getting people out of hotels is to make the decisions faster, is to work with the National Crime Agency and actually have some people focusing on the gangs to make sure that we go for the gangs.
Okay, but just in terms of the question,
Right.
do Labour support or object to the idea of using barracks to house asylum seekers?
I mean, I think that, as I say, it's not actually... What I object to with the use of barracks is that it's going to be used as an add-on to the hotel. So it's not a solution to the
but in
hotels.
principle, you don't have a problem with asylum seekers being put in barracks?
I don't have a problem with people being treated humanely, and I don't have a problem with a system which is firm and fast and fair. But frankly...
Yeah, literally, again, every single time, a direct question, now asked 4 times. Emily Thornberry has been asked 4 times whether or not she thinks that it is acceptable to be housing people in barracks or in ships, or whatever it is. And she can't answer the question, right? She cannot answer the question. And the answer is, of course, fucking no. These are concentration camps. Of course it's not okay. But she won't, because Labour are desperate to be seen to be as miserably and draconianly cruel against desperate people as the Conservatives are. It's pathetic. Absolutely pathetic.
None of that is here with that. All they're trying to do is set up a fight and an argument so that we don't think about the core problem and the core reason why we have a problem.
OK, so you're not committing as to whether you're supporting barracks or not. No. Andrew, is it a credible alternative?
What we've got to do is establish safe and legal routes for people who are seeking asylum. 45,000 people crossed the Channel last year. Some people come to grief as a result of that. That's an appalling situation. Yeah. And we should be doing everything and stretching every sinew to reduce that and get at the awful criminals that prey on these vulnerable people.
But the government's not talking about increasing safe and legal routes until after it has reduced the current number, the current backlog. As I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong. So in the meantime, it's suggesting using military barracks. Is that a credible alternative?
Well, we've got to get people out of hotels. There's no question about that. It's bad for the individuals. It's bad for the communities in which they tend to be. It's all-round bad news. I think this is part...
What about Serco's profits? What about Calder conferences? You're taking away money from hard-working small businesses such as Serco. How dare I cannot believe you would want to impede upon the property management firm that owns Calder Conferences to be able to pay their executives £2 million bonuses, because that is genuinely what happened. One of the subcontractors they used to house migrants in hotels was a family firm called Calder Conferences, which is owned by a gigantic property empire that's owned by the family. and the CEO of the conference company they used as a subcontractor for these migrant hotels, she paid herself a bonus of £2 million.
Of the solution, but I have to say, dealing with this, Fiona, is going to be multifaceted. There is no magic wand that's going to deal with this situation. We will deal with it.
It's true. I mean, literally true, Scribby. Like, the people here who are actually showing the most amount of organisation are the criminal gangs shipping people across the channel, and not either of the political parties that we should be trusting to deal with the situation.
I'm confident of that, but the solution is going to be multifaceted and actually really rather complicated.
And in terms of being credible, you've got 166,000 odd people waiting to have their asylum claim processed, and the barracks will house something like 5,000.
As I say, it's going to be part of the solution.
Like, I mean, that's absolutely right, Tartines. It's so funny in that I fucking despise the ALP. I really dislike the ALP, and the state of the current Labour Party in the UK right now. I genuinely I warm to Albanese because he seems like a nice guy in the way that basically none of the Labour front bench are inherently likable. None of them are likable in the slightest, right? And at least, you know, in out of a lot of the people who are in the regional areas in the ALP, you've got people like Dan Andrews who are great. And you compare them to basically everybody in the Labour Party in the UK, and it's, like, they're all miserable in the UK. They're all terrible, like devoid of any amount of charisma or ideology or of drive or ambition or vision. It's enough to make you come mad. It's enough to drive you crazy.
It's not the whole part, but I think it's a credible bit in the jigsaw.
All right, there's lots of hands. Let's come to this. Yes, the man of the cloth there. Let's hear from you.
Is it really true to say that it is a credible situation? Our obligations towards the Geneva Convention on Refugees are actually being upheld by the way that we are treating refugees at the moment, or I should say asylum seekers. I have the joy of having asylum seekers in the parish where I work. They do not harm our community. They positively enhance our community. They are a great bunch of guys who are able to have made a real change for the better for the church where I am and for the community where I am. It makes me so upset that this is seen as a problem, and we're not listening to the stories of these asylum seekers who potentially have got so much to offer and have come from really
Conservatives, here's a ghoulish policy which benefits nobody except us now donors and is electorally poisonous. Labour, well, we don't have any position against this or for it. We would need to see the evidence when in government. Well, actually, the opposite. They say they're for it. They say that they're for the policies. They just call the Conservative policy platform specifically a gimmick or unworkable or inefficient or costly. They never have any kind of ideological or moral criticisms of anything that the Tories do. They only ever talk about it in this kind of fucking political flim-flam surrounding it to try and discredit the policy without discrediting the motivation for the policy, which, again, is completely fucking pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. We want this ghoulish policy, but God, we're not total monsters. We'll turn it down a notch and, crucially, be far more efficient at doing so as well.
safe places. They need to be given. They need more.
Young woman here in.
I can't believe. Did they let this guy in by mistake? He's not on the approved list of opinions that are allowed to be broadcast on the BBC. What, pro asylum seekers? You can be pro asylum seekers? That seems like lefty, pinko, commie, woke, virtue signalling bullshit to me.
The young woman in the jacket and the sweater, yeah.
Understandably, lots of the focus is on migrants who cross the channel and end up in these barracks. But why isn't there any sort of greater discussion around the undocumented population, given that if we're talking about the welfare of these people who come here, they're an even more vulnerable population, often involved in things like modern slavery. No one seems to be seriously proposing solutions or giving much airtime to them.
Okay, the man here.
No, we are giving plenty of airtime to people who are being victims of modern slavery. The airtime we're getting is that your protections for modern slavery are being removed, right? Doesn't matter how sex trafficked you are, my friend. You've come into the country illegally, we are removing all of the protections, and you will be at the mercy of the criminal gangs and ad infinitum, right? That's the position we're at with the discussion around modern slavery in this country. We're entirely being governed by actual monsters, both in the press and in the political class.
in the blue top.
It's got to be better than putting them in hotels where it was reported yesterday that it costs an individual £150 to put them in a hotel. Which hotels are they staying in? I certainly couldn't afford to stay in those hotels. So basis has got to be a financially better prospect.
Danny.
Yeah,
Well, look,
true.
this is a tragedy.
I mean, sure, like hotels are far more humane than putting these in concentration camps. But when you actually look at like the financial figures around, you know, treating people with basic human dignity and respect, I think you'll find it comes a little bit over budget, unfortunately. Imagine having this point of view on anything.
So many ways, you know, on your last point, the bitter reality is also that some of those hotels are being paid for out of the aid budget. Yesterday we found out in an independent report that a third of the UK's aid budget is now being spent in this country paying for hotels because the asylum system is not able to process people fairly. And I want to come back to the point made by the gentleman. You know, Fiona, you talked about my blog and talking about a compassionate Britain. Oxfam was founded 80 years ago on the basis that Britain was...
There's a story in The Guardian today about Afghans who worked in the British Army needing documentation from the Taliban to complete their asylum applications. Well, that's the crazy bit. People keep saying, oh, these people, they're just gaming the system because they don't have any documents. If they had any, they threw away their documents in the channel to ensure that they don't have any ability to be able to, you know, migrate legally, so they have to go through the asylum process. And I'm like, yeah, what documentation do you think people are getting from Assad or from Abiy Ahmed or from, God forbid, the fucking Taliban? Yeah, I'm sure the Sudanese government are just giving away pieces of documentation and passports to basically anybody who's under political repression. Think, you fuckers, think.
A compassionate and generous society. We helped build the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. We helped write the Refugee Convention. And now we've got governments that are trying to rip up those obligations. And what worries me most of all is the rhetoric, the sort of short-termism in this rhetoric. Involves over-promising and under-delivering and ends up, you know, stoking a fire of public anger that no politician seems to have any idea of how they're going to put the fire out. And that's really bad and really worrying for politics and trust in government.
I mean, you described the government plan on immigration as crazy.
If you take the Australian...
See, what's crazy, right, is if you ask these people a lot of these questions completely out of sight of the public, they'll give you the most draconian answers that they could possibly give because they just will repeat the lines that they've heard from whatever they've seen in the press. Yet when you actually have someone who's an expert on this stuff, like a genuine expert, this guy's from Oxfam, for fuck's sake, who comes on and said, this is being dealt with appallingly, with no concern given to people's human rights, where we need to actually engage with this issue with some amount of compassion. And people go, oh, actually, yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that when I hear it from somebody normal. Like, it's just... I hate how much power the press has to control the narrative in this country. British clergymen are out of touch with the man on the street. We, the Tories, will work hard to replace them with fire and brimstone preachers from the southern US. I mean, that's literally it, isn't it?
Example, because I think a lot of government policy here is modelled...
Well, because if anything, there's the current Conservative Party, as it is actually the Conservative Party of the last 40 years, has been way out of touch with the kind of Christian population in this country, because the ideology of neoliberalism is fundamentally at odds with the kind of communitarian nature of the Abrahamic religion specifically. Definitely not any way linked to Christianity, and absolutely in no way linked to Jewish philosophy. I mean, Jewish philosophy is incredibly communitarian in the way that they kind of make their moral prescriptions about how the legacy that you should leave, for example, is about the impact you have on, like creating and fostering a community in general, or not even the impact that you have, but just the community that you live in and you're a part of, and how that is created. Which is a far more, you know, that would be called wokeism. That's like called fucking woke, again, literally woke pinko commie bullshit. If you tried to, you know, bring up the idea of communitarian morality for any of the neoliberal, individualist, atomized ghouls who make up the neoliberal establishment class in this country.
On what Australia did. Australia had a horrendous approach to offshoring the processing of people who arrived on boats. It involved small numbers of people at huge cost, billions of dollars, and it involved reneging on international obligations. But what many people forget, of course, is that Australia, in addition to while doing that, was welcoming refugees through large-scale resettlement programs. 1 million people have been accepted into Australia as refugees or on humanitarian programs over the last 70 years. So where is that large-scale resettlement program to provide meaningful, safe and legal routes so that we can show the world that we are a compassionate nation?
Fraser.
The big change...
Well, literally, I know the story from watching Friendly Geordies as well, in that there was a company that was being paid by the coalition to make a detention centre on the island of Nauru. And the people who got given the contract were people who were owning a failing business that was about to go under, who were mates of one of the high-up people in the party, a guy called Peter Dutton, who got his mates given the contract for this brand new detention centre on Nauru at the cost of huge amounts to the taxpayer, and so much so they're now massively in the black, having been on the verge of bankruptcy. Like, again, never, ever, ever, as far as conservatives are concerned in any country, let a good crisis go to waste, right? There's always profit to be made in times of crisis.
In the last few years is the arrival of people smugglers, who now accounts for something like almost like half of all the arrivals here, asylum seekers, are taken by these guys, who are basically the closest we've got to the modern slave trade. Now, the problem is, unless you can tackle the problem, then you're sending people who pay between £3,000 and £15,000 for this journey. You need to break the people smugglers' business model, and to do it fairly. At the moment, I think I'm right in saying it costs £20,000 to help an asylum seeker in Britain. Now, for that money, how many could you help overseas? That's a sort of discussion that the government needs to have. Now, of course, it makes sense to...
Why are we having continual discussions about how much money it's worth to be able to adhere to people's basic human rights and adhere to our international obligations under the UN Refugee Convention? I hate these ghouls so much. I hate them so much. I hate them so much. They're just universally awful. But he's right in one thing. The one thing he's correct on here is that you do need to break the business model of the people smuggling gangs. And you break the business model by opening the safe and legal routes and mean they can come to the country without having to rely on the people smuggling gangs. You break the demand rather than fail to continually break the supply, as the war on drugs has told you millions of times over, and everyone should know by now that it's impossible to break the supply at source. You have to break the demand.
To do everything you can for those who arrive here, just to process them as quickly as you can. But when it comes to the accommodation, I think, to me, what's missing is that right now we ban them from working. We say to them, we're going to force you to basically stay at the taxpayer's expense, to stay on welfare, to wait for a year and a half to get processed, and we're not going to...
Marcus Drake with a subscription. Thank you for the contribution. Welcome to the No Justice stream. I hope you're doing well. Always appreciated. And other people, if you would like to support the stream, you can subscribe for $3.99, or you can subscribe for free by linking your Amazon account to your Twitch Prime account, and you get a free subscription to any of the creators that you like on Twitch every month. Or you can also drop bits to support the stream financially that way as well. And if you're watching this later on YouTube, if you read the little sentence that's to the left of my face, you can become a member for just 99p by clicking the join button in the down there part.
To let you do anything to support yourself while you're here. Now, these are some of the most energetic, most ingenious people that are incredibly creative. It seems to me a waste of money, a waste of talent to ban them from working. Yeah. So I think that is something that would save the accommodation. Just don't force them to stay at the taxpayer's expense. Look at the way when the Ukrainian refugees came in here, it was a very different situation. We allowed them to work. I think most of Ukrainian refugees managed to find a job.
Fraser, I wonder how it could possibly be that we have a different situation for white immigrants from Eastern Europe than we do from brown immigrants from the Middle East, Central Asia, and Africa. Don't you find that weird that there's such a difference there? Could it also have to do with people's perception of there being some kind of, I don't know, invasion, as to use Suella Braverman's words, of people from brown parts of the world moving to this country, right? Almost similar if a publication somebody might be an editor of did a front cover for their magazine which depicted a swarm of Muslims climbing up the White Cliffs of Dover. That'd be a bit weird, don't you think, if that was something that might theoretically have happened in the past, eh, Fraser?
And many of them are now self-financing. I think this is a country with something like 1 million vacancies right now, one of the most we've ever had. We badly need workers. We've got people desperate, I think, to do a good living here. So I think it's possible to have a system where you can... and by the way, I do support the government's plan for Rwandan deportations. I didn't used to. But I came around to the fact that this is the only real way of trying to break the human traffickers' business model. It worked with not so long ago. I think Albanians were counting for almost half of the arrivals of small boats. That was Albania is a safe country. Now, when the government managed to do a deal with the Albanian government and start deporting people, then the number of Albanians coming here went down very, very quickly. I think the same thing can happen with the small boats, and then we can focus on helping people who are here legitimately and getting through the backlog. But a whole bunch of things need to change, and I think that letting them work while they're here is a major step forward.
And here in the white shirt.
Hello. Conservatives have been in power now for nearly 13 years, and they still haven't got anything. They're not building suitable places for the immigrants that come over that want to stay here, you know, where everything's being processed, and putting them up in barracks, was it?
Yes,
I think that's ridiculous. We need investment, and I don't understand why it's taking Conservatives so long. And
because it's public investment. They are allergic to public investment. Public expenditure is the anathema of their politics. If they cannot find a solution for the private sector, they will find the cheapest and most demeaning way possible to be able to solve these issues, because they do not fundamentally want to spend any money solving any problems if they don't need to.
Ridiculous idea of flying everybody to...
Unless, of course, their mates in the private sector can benefit from their spending. Right? If it's Serco getting the contracts to house people in hotels, they fucking love spending money. Or on dodgy PPE contracts. Then they do love spending money.
WADA, I think that's stupid. They need something that's more humanitarian. They need something that's more thought out, because there's a lot of people, a lot of potential that's coming over that can help England and the United Kingdom. And at the moment we're wasting it because we're not letting them work. We're putting them up in hotels. We should have things that's better. And we've got a housing crisis as well. Conservatives should be on this. They shouldn't be 13 years in and still scratching their heads.
OK, well, Daniel, I'm going to come back to Andrew. I'll come back to you, obviously. Before I do, Helen, we've not heard from you. So are the government's plans to house migrants in ex-military bases, potentially vessels, a credible alternative to using hotels? Of course, we've already seen the Foreign Secretary, the former Home Secretary, objecting to the military base in their constituencies, and also another Tory MP, Edward Lee, also doing the same.
Well, I think overall we shouldn't be in a situation where we've run out of hotel space and now we're looking for ever more inventive ways of finding places for these people to languish while we process their claims. I think, you know, clearly they have to go somewhere because we haven't dealt with them properly. But it's outrageous that we've got 160,000 people languishing in hotels on £5 a day, waiting to be homed. And frankly, I was astonished by Andrew's answer because the government haven't prioritised safe and legal routes at all. They've prioritised the deterrent and the demonising of people who are coming here for safety at every step of the way. And I think it's extraordinary that we've heard that this evening, because actually it's clearly the right answer. And the other thing that makes me quite angry is that the safe and legal routes that are in place, we know are a fallacy. We know there are people in Afghanistan who have a right to come here, who've been asked to go to the Taliban to get their documents stamped to come here. And I think, frankly, the way we're treating migrants at the moment, it's not only incompetent and highly costly, it's frankly inhumane, and it's shameful.
Here for a couple more people. Yes.
I definitely down for a Mao of landlords, 100%. Although to be fair, I am far I know Mao is the meme. But I'm also a big fan of the Ho Chi Minh approach as well.
The man here in the blue sweater towards the front.
Yeah, hi. I think that the government seems to be focusing on the wrong issue here. It's focusing on the symptoms and not the cause. And we constantly keep hearing sound bites from this government about Rwanda. I mean, if I was an asylum seeker looking to cross the channel, I'd be more concerned about drowning. I mean, these people are willing to risk their life, so I wouldn't give a damn about going to Rwanda. I'd be more concerned about the risk of crossing the channel in a small dinghy. The actual the cause is obviously we've got kind of global issues where people are being displaced through war or famine, and I get that that's going to take a while to resolve. But basically, these gangs that are exploiting these people, no one seems. I mean, it's not really in France's interest to stop it because they're just moving the problem onto another country. So we're not actually sort of tackling the cause, and we hear like words from the Conservative government, but nothing. And this gentleman's right. We had 13 years, and the situation. We had Brexit, where we're supposed to take control of our own borders, and the situation is worse, and it's getting worse. Now we're looking at, we're trying to scratch around, looking for.
It's literally worse because of Brexit. It's literally worse because of Brexit, because a bunch of agreements around refugees we are now not a part of, like the Dublin Arrangement.
Disused buildings to house these people. When's it going to start getting better?
Let me just ask, because obviously the government is pursuing this policy in the belief that it is popular with the electorate. And so far what we've heard is pretty universal criticism of it. Is there anyone here who supports what the government is I see loads of hands going down. Yes, you, sir, in the pink shirt. Let's hear from you.
I'd like to say that most people would support offering a safe haven to people escaping terror and war zones. Isn't part of the problem the ability to filter people? I understand that the processing personnel have been reduced by about 40%, which is causing a logjam.
OK. Well, listen, let's put these points. Andrew, so you're hearing, I have to say, I mean, when I asked for support, I didn't really see an awful lot. And you had the gentleman here who was saying, you've been in power for 13 years.
Yeah.
When's it going to get better?
Yeah. It's a fair call, but it's a pan-European problem. So you go to every country in Europe, you'll get a similar story. You'll get it in France,
Yes, but you're not
Germany,
in government for them. You're in government for here. So what are you going to do about here?
It sets the context and it explains the complexity of the situation. Now, look, we've got to stop the boats for the reasons I've explained. We must stop the boats. We've got to get people out of hotels. That's completely unsatisfactory. What I would say, though, is there are safe and legal routes, and we've heard a couple of them described. We've had people from Syria, Hong Kong. We've had people from Ukraine.
They think the actual real safe and legal route is Hong Kong and Ukraine, right? The vast majority of all of these asylum seekers that we've taken in, the vast majority have come from Ukraine and Hong Kong. Like 6 figures of people have come from Hong Kong. And you know why they're happy to come from Hong Kong and Ukraine? It's because they're not from Muslim majority countries. That's it. That's the only reason why there's this massive difference between the hundreds of thousands that have been granted asylum from Hong Kong and the 22 who've come from Afghanistan.
Ukraine particularly, including in my constituency. These things exist. What I'm interested to see is what happens with Albania, since we're now repatriating Albanians because they have no basis to be in this country. And if we see, as we anticipate, a fall-off in people making that hazardous journey from Albania, a safe country, to the UK, then I think that will be an indicator of success. But I come back to what I said originally, Fiona. The solution to this isn't one-off, it's multifactorial, and the things we've heard described this evening are all part of a solution, but it's going to be long and complex, and at the end of the day, it will be incomplete. There will always be people who make that hazardous journey. What we have to do is to drive that down to a minimum and make sure genuine asylum seekers seek safe and legal routes to claim asylum in this country where they have always been welcomed.
OK. I'm going to take another question. Before I do, I just want to say that we are on a 2-week break after this programme for Easter, as indeed are MPs. And when we return, we'll be in York and then we'll be in Ealing in West London. So if you'd like to come to a future programme, the address is on the screen here. Have a look there and you can see how to apply. So that's York and then Ealing in West London. We would love to see you. Right, let's take another question. I'm going to try and get through a number if I can tonight. Jeff Halls.
Can we ever get to net zero?
Right, OK. So the UK policy is to get to net zero by 2050, so to put no more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere than we take out. Can we get to net zero, Andrew? The government's made a big play today of its Green Day, whatever it's calling it.
Yeah. The answer is yes, we can and we must. And there are 2 reasons for that, and they're 2 sides of the same coin. 1 is the environment and our need to protect it. 2 is our security. And if the past few months have taught us anything at all, is that we must become more self-reliant on energy. 40% of our electricity last year was generated from renewables. We've cut our emissions since 2010 by 50%. That's the fastest rate in the G7. We're doing well in this country, and also that's generating prosperity for us and jobs, including in my own constituency. So there's every good reason, whether you believe in climate change or not, whether you think it's man-made or not, to be supporting this. And the answer to the gentleman is yes, we can, and yes, we will.
Because that's the crazy thing, right? Is that the one thing, even if you're a gigantic climate change skeptic, right? The one thing that renewable energy would give us is energy security in a world in which so much of our energy generation is entirely dependent on ensuring that there are low global gas prices, which never lasts forever. Luckily, right? The sun is going to outlive most of us. So are the tides. So is the wind, right? We can always rely on this stuff, at least, on a yearly basis, right? Has the Lib Dem got a word in yet? She's been smiling for 20 odd minutes. She had one sentence where she castigated the government for being inhumane, which was true and also based.
I agree with Andrew on one point, which is that we must. I was in Somalia recently, where there is a heartbreaking drought, the worst drought we've seen in 40 years, and people in that part of the world who've had nothing to do with climate breakdown are suffering the consequences of climate breakdown today. There's been an eightfold increase in humanitarian need as a result of extreme weather events that are driving droughts, floods, wildfires, cyclones. And so we have to do something like this. But the plans that the government have set out today are tinkering at the edge.
The thing is, the thing is, Will Lingley, I was like, on a lot of subjects historically, the Liberal Democrats have been more quote-unquote liberal than the Labour Party have. Things like immigration and things like asylum seekers and things like the climate policy, the Lib Dems are generally a little, it fluctuates, but a little bit more progressive than the Labour Party on this stuff. But they're just so fucking capitalism pilled that you just cannot support them, to the point at which they were very happy supporting David Cameron's, reign of terror and George Osborne's, austerity budget, mass murder austerity budget, because they were happy to get 5p charges on plastic bags and, a vote on equal marriage. Like, that's why the Lib Dems can't be trusted, because they are the absolute worst excesses of social liberalism.
There's no new money, there's no new investment, there are no new ideas. We need a game-changing set of interventions, and I was really disappointed that the Chancellor today wrote a blog that said that he doesn't want to get into a race on subsidies with the United States on who can subsidise green technology. This is a race to save our planet, to save our species. We need much better, more significant interventions from government.
I mean, for once, I agree with the Chancellor. I don't want any subsidies on renewable energy. I want the state to fucking own it. State-owned enterprises. No more subsidy, no more shoveling public cash into the pockets of shareholders. State-owned enterprises keep the profits, distribute the profits based upon the people's needs, for the people, by the people. That's what we want. We don't want subsidy. We want state-owned enterprises. Which GB Energy is not. It is just a slush fund.
Okay. The woman there in the orange cardi.
When are the government going to stop their greenwash? At the same time they're saying they're doing such a wonderful job, they're outsourcing most of the carbon emissions to China and so on, because our manufacturing has been destroyed. And they're granting airport expansions, they're granting covering, coal mines, they're granting North Sea oil.
Has this person been watching my stream?
They're talking one thing, but actually doing very, very little.
Okay. I will come back to that.
I know I say this every single time we have the climate change argument. I say it over and over and over again. We spend so much of our time talking about the theoretical, futurist new inventions that we're going to get from some kind of mythical inventor, Elon Musk type figure, who's going to come and create this brand new technology that's going to revolutionize the way we do things and is going to solve the climate crisis immediately. We're just going to literally betting fucking the entirety of the planet on black at this point, right? When the solutions literally already exist, we just do not have the political will. We need more trains, we need more buses, we need fewer cars, and we need renewable energy. Like, these are the main things that we need to do. All of these things already exist. There just needs to be the political will, and we need to tell the fossil fuel industry to go fuck themselves. But unfortunately, every single political party is cucked to the fossil fuel industry, apart from the Green Party, really, at this point. So we can't do that. We literally can't do that, and we have to continually fight tooth and nail with NIMBY boomers who refuse to let you actually build any new green infrastructure in their area, and they continue to live in incredibly wasteful suburban communities that are not built in a sustainable fashion. And these are our continual fight, is the political will. It's not the technology, it's none of that. It is the political will that is the issue here.
Over the glasses. Yes. Oh, hang on a minute. I've got the mic in the wrong place. Wait a minute. I'll come to you in a second. Tracy, it's a woman back there in the glasses with the purple top. Yes.
Oh, me. I think this question relates to the earlier question about immigration, because the things that we're doing in Britain now are going to have an impact on a lot of countries around the world. We're seeing it already with very low-lying islands, the Maldives, other places where people are having to leave their homes and resettle. So in terms of how the government is addressing all of this, are you going to start looking at how we start dealing with climate refugees?
Right, let's hear from you now.
I think it's quite ridiculous that the minister's talking about his government's record like that, when only this week the government's own Committee on Climate Change said that they're only on track in 5 out of 45 of the objectives to reach net zero by 2050. And that's a time when, as I said before, they're continuing airport expansion, like here in Bristol, and they're also giving new oil licences to places in the North Sea and pushing that forward. I think that the government to claim that they're on track is completely ridiculous.
Okay. Actually, hang on, back to you. Before I do, Andrew, do you want to answer some of these points? Because the government has given the green light to the opening of a new Cumbrian coal mine, which has been criticised by the UN. You've got the point here. You've also got the Climate Change Committee saying the government's not on track. You've got the National Audit Office saying the government's not on track. Oil and gas licences of Scotland. What makes you so sure you're going to get to net zero by 2050?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that we have to take other countries with us. This is obviously a global phenomenon. A number of the guests this evening have pointed that out. We are responsible for 1% of global emissions. So if we completely close down our economy tomorrow, we will still scratch the surface of this, and it would put my constituents out of a job. There's no doubt about that. Now, I'm a local MP, and I know Bristol Airport reasonably well. I also know we're trying to green the aviation industry. I don't think anybody wants to wipe it out. I don't think anybody wants
Hang on a minute. Why do you think people are laughing at that?
Well, I think it's because aircraft and green don't necessarily automatically go into the same basket.
On Saturday, the government's halving air passenger duty on domestic flights. Does that feel particularly good?
Like the point that the woman in the crowd, in the audience rather, made earlier about the fact that we just exported all of our energy generation, all of our manufacturing pollution to other countries. She's bang on the nose, right? Why does China create the most CO2 out of any country in the world? It's because it's the manufacturing hub of the world, and it's not manufacturing to sell products to people in India, to sell to people in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's not manufacturing for the population of other countries around there. It's manufacturing to satiate the continual desires for infinite consumption in the West.
If we are to maintain people's desire to do air travel, go on holiday reasonably cheaply, then we do have to green, as far as we possibly can, the aviation industry, and that's absolutely an imperative. Well, I'm not going to turn around to my constituents who work really hard, day in, day out, and who look forward to their 2 weeks in the sun. I'm not going to turn around to them and say, I'm sorry, but you can't do that. But if you lived in France or Germany or Italy, then you can. I think that would not be a popular thing to do. And what I would say...
Actually, I think I'm going to side with the Tory on this one. The issue is not some people engaging in, twice a year commercial flights to go on holiday, compared to the fact that 70% of global emissions are being emitted at the behest of gigantic megacorporations. Tom, Dick and Sally, right? Going on holiday to Marbella is not going to cause climate breakdown. What's going to cause climate breakdown is huge amounts of fossil fuel lobbying money being used to ensure their continual domination of energy and manufacturing markets.
Is just to reiterate the point, we are streets ahead of our peer group. I'm really proud of the fact that we are decarbonising at the fastest rate in the G7. I think that is a real achievement. We should be proud of that, but I agree entirely there is so much more to be done. I agree 2050 is a challenge target. It's going to be really difficult. It's going to alter profoundly the way we live our lives, but we have to do it.
Helen. OK, all right, you're saying 2050 is too late. I mean, Helen, it comes down to very difficult choices, doesn't it? I mean, you're getting a barracking here from some people in the audience about flights, for example, but people do want to get on flights, and they do want to go on holiday and not be told that they can't do it. For example. I mean, there's lots of things like that.
Well, that's true, but I think the government has made some really, appalling progress, really, since 2015. I think we did make good progress, actually, when we had a Lib Dem Climate Secretary, Energy Secretary, and we quadrupled the energy output from renewables, but it's been pretty sluggish since, and people in the audience, I think the lady over there already mentioned the Cumbrian coal mine. There's no commitment to
building. So you think that should, just to be clear, you think it shouldn't be opened?
It shouldn't be opened, and it was the local people in Cumbria didn't want it open either, and there's no sense to this decision.
So what are the...
I also don't actually necessarily disagree with opening the coal mine in Cumbria either. As far as I was aware from the information that I'd seen, opening the coal mine is not being used to fuel coal-fired power station. As far as I'm aware, it's for metallurgical coal to build up the steel for use in the steel industry. Correct me if I'm wrong in chat, but I don't think that the coal mine is the real massive issue here.
Difficult choices that the Lib Dems would make, for example, in order to get us to net zero by 2050, or as the UN wants, by 2040.
Well, there are some easy things you can do, like insulate houses, for example, which wasn't mentioned in Australia.
How easy is that, actually? You've got 20 million homes. Many of them, I mean, insulating new builds is perhaps easier, but when it comes to Britain's old housing stock, how easy is that actually?
Well, you've just got to invest, haven't you? We've got to have the right people with the right skills to do those jobs, and we've got to have the right incentives in place for people to want to improve their housing. And there's got to
have you any idea how much that would cost?
And if I don't know off the top of my head how much that would cost, but the reality is we have to make these choices now. And there are ways of bringing down that cost. So, for example, if you do a whole street in one go, that's far cheaper than doing little pepper-potted houses here and there. So there are steps that we can take, but today didn't include allowing onshore wind.
Didn't the steel industry say it wouldn't produce the right sort of coal for modern steel coking anyway? Possibly, that might be the case. And if that is the case, then I would then disagree. If it's going to be used nonsensically, then obviously if it's not going to be used for the steel industry, then it will just end up getting pumped into some fucking Drax-owned coal-fired power station, which obviously I'm not in favour of.
Generation. I mean, that there are loads of things that could have been done today that were simple, straightforward steps that were missing from this plan. And I'm afraid the lady up there is right. This was just greenwashing.
Fraser.
We're incredibly down on ourselves in this country about the progress we make. I mean, Andrew Morrison isn't quite right to say we've made the best progress in the G7. We've made the best progress in the G20. There is not an industrialised country in the world that's cut their carbon emissions faster than Britain.
Closed all the coal mines.
Well, yes, we have. We've moved to gas and it's a lot more efficient, but there's nowhere. And,
Interesting, right? They say no one's cut our emissions as much, right? Interesting little turn of phrase there where they say, well, the problem is that we were on loads beforehand. This, like, do you think we have more emissions than France? Of course we fucking don't, because France were investing in nuclear power decades ago whilst we were still on the privatized gas network, the expansion of gas power that happened in the 90s after the grace period for British Gas's control of the energy market was removed in 1998, I believe it was, where huge amounts of new gas power plants they sprung up into the private market because they were the ones with the cheapest startup costs and global gas prices were low, so they were profitable. Whereas at the same time, countries on the continent were saying, let's invest in something that's long term, that is renewable mostly, in the form of nuclear power. So France were green way before we were, just because we're now catching up and we've cut our emissions a lot, right? It's again, we're catching up to where everybody else is. Again, a really, really kind of sneaky rhetorical trick that these rightoids will do to try and play around with the facts to make it sound better than it is.
I believe they're talking about greenwashing. Now, even if you include the things that we import from China, then we made the second best progress in the whole of the G20. Our carbon emissions are now the lowest since Victorian days, not since 1857 has our carbon output per capita been so low. This is, in my lifetime, carbon emissions have halved. Now, this is incredible progress, and the answer is not to tax the poor off the roads and out of the sky. It's not to ramp up people's heating bills to even more unaffordable than it is already. This is being done, by and large, by simple scientific progress. We're using things far more efficiently.
Fuck off!
The engines.
No, that's not what's happening. We've had to divest. We've had to build things that have existed in their capacity for energy generation for decades, right? Things like solar, things like wind, offshore tidal power, what have you, whatever it may be, right? This is technology that's always existed for the vast majority of the time. People have been complaining about the climate crisis. To say that they're just going, all we had to just was just wait for science to do its job and the free market would take care of it. Fuck off, Fraser. That's nonsense. That's abject nonsense.
Of, I hate to say the word, but capitalism. Capitalism and technology, consumer choices, we are becoming cleaner and greener. We are learning to tread more lightly on the planet.
But when you hear, Fraser, the UN saying we're just not getting there fast enough, we're not going to make it, we're not going to stick to this 1.5 degrees above the industrial level, above the 19th century, we're just not going to get there.
Yeah, by the we, but don't mean Britain as 1%.
No, sure, I mean the world.
But China.
Defense, of course.
And by the way, this is where I find Oxfam's position a bit strange, because I would have thought, take China, right? In the last 40 years, China's
I bet he's not including carbon offshoring for production in that estimate. Very true, Lemmy. Very, very true.
Carbon emissions have quadrupled. A big problem, right? But why they quadrupled? Because China has taken 800 million people out of poverty. When countries rise from their agrarian knees, when they stop being quite so poor, they start to consume a little bit. Now, is China's carbon footprint a price worth paying for taking all those million people out of poverty? I would say absolutely. We need to remember this. When we talk about we, sure, China, the rest of the world...
Yeah, but China is also on the path to try and change their energy generation to try and be approaching net zero. I think there's a 2060 because they've retrograded behind us because of all the time they lost during the Chairman Mao period, right? So they've got a little more ways to go than a lot of other Western countries do because they decarbonized later because they developed they became carbonized later, right? They do have a plan to be able to reduce this. In fact, they are the biggest hydroelectric power plant in the world is in China, for example. So, there's still the ability for these late blooming economies to be able to decarbonize eventually. Places like India and China, which had their economic development happen in a later period than we did. That's not an excuse for us to just go, well, China aren't doing it, so we don't have to do it. And it's also not an excuse for saying that China cannot, therefore, create the same level of prosperity through renewable needs rather than having to rely on the fossil fuel industry, which is what Fraser Nelson here is basically trying to imply, that there would be no potential for any country to be properly prosperous if it were not for the fossil fuel industry. That's what he's sneakily trying to say here.
I mean, the rich world's carbon emissions, going down pretty much for the last couple of decades. It's the rest of the world where they're going up, and that's because people aren't dying quite so young. We're living better.
No, it's because we offshored all of the production to China and India and Thailand or whatever it is. And Bangladesh. We literally offshored all of the production. That's why their carbon emissions are going up and ours are going down.
Fuller lives, and thank God for that. And carbon, if carbon is the price we pay for that, that is a price worth paying because there are other things we can do. We can do carbon capture. There are plans about that today. We can do all kinds of things.
You literally cannot do carbon capture right now. That's nonsense science. It's a gigantic capitalist boondoggle to try and essentially placate the continued existence of the fossil fuel industry. It's, come on. Like, I'm so sick. I'm sick to the back fucking teeth hearing about fucking carbon capture. It's nonsense. It's complete waste of time. It's a gigantic money sink for no reason for people to think they're doing something good when they're really not. Where do you think the power generation is going to come to run the carbon capture? It's going to come from the existing energy mix that we currently have, which at some point is 40% gas. What the fuck? What's the fucking point? It's trying to run a perpetual motion machine.
We do not have to make the poor and those who can barely afford to take a flight or drive in their car, they do not have to bear the price for this. Technology can do it, and we know that because look at the last 40 years. The progress we're making in Britain is unbelievably good, and we should congratulate ourselves, I think, a little bit more for that.
Emily.
I think that some country is going to win this global race for becoming a green economy, and I can't see any reason why it shouldn't be us. You know, we were the country that first industrialised. We're the country that should be able to show the way when it comes to an alternative way of living. And that would give us security. We wouldn't need to worry about Putin anymore. We would be making our own energy. We would be insulating our homes so that people's bills went down forever, would not go up again. We would have electric cars, but that does mean that we need to invest.
Yeah, literally, if we'd have invested at any point for the last fucking 40 years of this shit, right? If we'd never privatised the energy industry in the first place and were able to do a quick transition through the power of the state, or if we'd had any kind of state investment over the neoliberal period at all, we'd be in a fantastic position to be able to be way ahead on this stuff, and we just never did because privatisation wasn't profitable enough for the private sector.
In plants that will be making the batteries. You know, we need to have a bit of vision and, quite frankly, a bit of leadership. And what we saw today was yet another bit of greenwash, as people have said, repackaged and now kind of shinier green bit of paper. But it's Groundhog Day. It's the same thing over and over again. And it simply isn't radical enough. And I think people want this government to go further and faster because we all know we have an obligation to look after the world and we can lead the way.
But Emily, what country is doing it better than us?
That's not the point. That's not actually. Do you know what? It's not the point. It's not the point. It's not the point. First of all, I think it's arguable as to whether other countries are doing worse. I mean, you go to somewhere like Denmark or Sweden, and you see the way in which they insulate their homes and where they get their energy from. But the point is this, right, is that with a bit, I mean, given that we have the wind power that we have around our country, you know, given the potential that we have for renewables, we are not going fast enough. Why don't we have onshore wind? Why do we have these drafty homes? Why aren't we insulating them? No, we are not.
It's happening all the time. It's happening at breakneck speed.
Like, we literally have, like, the fucking worst housing stock in Europe. Like, at least in Western Europe, at the very least. Our housing stock is terrible. It's so bad. You look at, take Austria, for example, and you take the incredibly well-designed, well-built council houses. You get, like, council flats in Austria for £600 a month where you have a pool and tennis courts. And that's the point that they're at with the amount of actual investment they have in being able to rebuild the housing stock in those countries. Not for, like, luxury flats. This is basic council housing that they've got, right, in Austria. And what do we get here? We've got we literally have entire social media accounts dedicated to cataloguing the ways in which the houses we have in this country, not just badly insulated, but unfit for human habitation, because they're not even legally required to be fit for human habitation, because the private sector does not look after their consumers because it doesn't need to, because the government's planning laws are entirely at the behest of the middle-class, home-owning, suburban boomer types who vote continually against new developments in their areas. And that goes for people who vote Conservative and people who vote Green. They both want to get rid of additional building permits, and I'm fucking sick of it. Like the eco NIMBYs are almost worse than the rightoid NIMBYs. They say, oh, you can't build, think about all the green space. Fuck the green space. People need to be off the streets. Right? If you build it high density enough, you'll maintain a vast majority of the green space anyway. Oh, but then you think, oh, well, the high density housing is going to be too ugly. I don't give a shit. Fucking build it, right? Our country would be way better if our suburban areas were all fucking Khrushchevkas, rather than new single family home units that we have at the moment.
What we need to do is we need to be able to borrow, to invest in our future in order to be able to kickstart our economy again, because our economy has been on a...
Finally, we literally have a single Labour MP admitting they're going to deficit spend. I've been waiting for months and months and months and months and months for them to admit you cannot pay for everything with the non-dom tax. You cannot pay for everything by removing the non-dom exemption. You have to find additional ways of funding other things. And they're finally admitting we will deficit spend for investment. Fucking finally. I managed to bleed it out after all of these months of continually expecting it, and finally it's happened.
Downward slide over the last few years. So not only can we bring people with us in terms of telling them about energy security and insulating their homes, but we can also say to people, there's good jobs out there. There's good jobs out there and there's a good future for our country. But we do need to invest to do that. And that is what we are saying. And that's why we say that we will borrow £28 billion a year and invest it in our future and get our economy going again and get a bit of growth in our economy and be growing in the right way. Well, we've been talking...
She's done well in this segment. I'm not going to lie. She really was genuinely pathetic during the segment about the immigration issue. But when we're like Emery Thornberry, she looked pretty good on this one. Khrushchevkas look awful, sadly. Renovated Khrushchevkas look good. I think it's an important point to raise with regards to the housing issue. Is that a lot of the issues that we have with old housing stock, actually, it doesn't even matter. Like, people look at the Khrushchevkas and they don't look great. You look at the kind of housing that you got out of the Eastern Bloc states during the 60s, for example. Do you think that we were building better housing in the UK at that time? Not really. We were also building large tower blocks, for example. Right? Look at Grenfell. Like, that was a big tower, like council flat tower block. Like, how much more aesthetically pleasing is that than a Khrushchevka? Not really. This isn't a result of the idea that somehow Soviet housing in the 60s, for example, was just unilaterally bad. And I don't like brutalism either. But we've seen from the kind of council housing and social housing that's been built in Western Europe, for example, in places like Austria and Denmark in this decade, right? The very famous, that big white tower block from Austria that I was talking about before, or Karl Marxhof, or the new the cuboid student accommodation social housing that they have in Denmark, for example. We now actually have the ability to build cheap, affordable, and nice-looking social housing in any country, right? The ways we have of building this stuff is far more advanced than it ever was, both over here and in any other country in the Eastern Bloc, in the time when people were building huge amounts of new houses in the period after the Second World War, before the economic downturn of the 70s. So yes, Khrushchevkas do look bad. I'm not saying that they, but we can build similar styles of high density housing, but that do look nice given the advancements that we have in architecture nowadays. I think that's a point worth making.
Talking about insulating homes, let's sort of in that area. Let's hear.
Yes, Alta La is exactly the one I was talking about. Yeah, absolutely.
From Melissa Ward. Melissa, where are you?
Should I accept the fact that I may never be able to afford to buy my own home?
So should you have to accept you may never be able to afford your own home? And you're, tell us a bit about yourself, Melissa. You're how old?
I'm 25.
Right, and what do you do?
I'm a trainee clinical scientist.
Right, so that's a proper job right there.
Job is a proper job, apart from being a landlord.
Do you think Do you think you'll ever be able to afford it? Do you think it's just completely off the cards? You're renting, presumably, at the moment?
I rent at the moment, yes. It just seems quite far out of reach, given rent prices and how difficult it is to save up for a deposit.
Okay. I'm sure you won't be alone in that. Helen?
Well, I think the crisis in the private rented market is well documented, and I think we're all aware that there's huge pressure on it. And just in terms of, I've just set up my office in North Shropshire. A couple of people moved to North Shropshire to come and work for me, found themselves in exactly your position, except they couldn't even find somewhere to rent. And somewhere like North Shropshire, where you would expect the pressures to be low.
Interesting that we were just talking about the housing crisis just after I did my segment about how I want to rebuild rebuild Eastern Bloc housing in the UK.
They're extremely high. People are struggling to find homes.
I mean, well, the number of available homes to rent in the UK has decreased by a third since in the last 18 months. Well, look, housing is your brief. What can be done about it?
What important to point out here, she's saying the amount of available homes to rent, so that's rented homes on the market. The amount of homes that are being used for rentals has basically remained stagnant because they've not been building, right? That's the real issue here. What happens a lot of the time when we have this discussion about the lack of rental housing stock, will still keep saying, oh, well, the Tories, they're implementing so many new rules that landlords have to adhere to. It's not profitable anymore. No, it's obviously still profitable. It's still profitable. There's no huge amounts of landlords selling up and getting out of the market. These properties are still on the market. These properties still are there for rent, right? It's just the demand for being in these rented properties has increased. Therefore, the amount of available unletted units has then gone down, right? This idea that landlords are just leaving the rented sector en masse, nonsense is capital strike. Ignore that stuff.
Well, I think that there are two things. I think first of all, the top-down housing targets that all parties have had on their commitment sheet, if you like, for a long period of time, haven't delivered. We haven't delivered 300,000 new homes since the 60s, and it's not working. So we need to have a fresh approach to how we look at new housing. But for me, most importantly, we need to have a fresh approach to social housing, because we know there are 1.5 million people on social housing waiting lists, and that's adding pressure into the private rented market, pushing rents up for people like yourself who can't save for a deposit because of it. But it's also meaning that we've got families living in inappropriate accommodation, bed and breakfast, people being moved around, kids getting settled in a rented house.
No, we do not have negative gearing for investment properties. When I first heard, when I first heard about negative gearing, it blew my fucking mind. My God, what that is literally the worst policy I've ever fucking heard of. Ever heard of. My God. Whoever invented negative gearing, it was negative gearing Howard or Keating? I don't remember. First home buyer grants. Yes, we have Help to Buy, is what we have here.
And then being uprooted because their landlords evicted them and sent somewhere else. It's an appalling situation. The government have promised renters reform. They haven't delivered it. We need to see that. We need to see it now. But I think most importantly, we need to see a proper investment in social housing.
Okay, let's hear from someone. The woman the woman in the pink sweater.
Yeah, just to say, as a parent of 2 young children, my husband and I bought our first house together at the age of 26. I can envisage now that my children will not be able to buy a house at that age, or maybe even 36. And the only way that they potentially will be able to have a house is if my husband and I leave them the house that we will eventually finish paying our mortgage when we're into our 60s. But then, if we leave them our house, our children would be subject to paying a 40% inheritance tax on that property. So I can just see the difficulties. This is not only in private rented accommodation, but people getting onto the property ladder. I just can't see it happening for people in their 30s at the moment.
Okay. Man here in the dark blue.
And as I said before, when we were discussing this kind of stuff about young people earlier on in the stream, the issue really isn't about whether or not they're going to be able to inherit the house. There'll be no house for them to be able to inherit, because the parents have to sell it to pay for social care, because we're in a social care crisis at the moment where it's all been fucking foisted upon the private sector. So that's the real issue. And where are those houses going to go? Those houses aren't going to be bought by future new owner occupiers from the generation below. They're going to be bought by gigantic multinationals or big, huge investment firms like BlackRock, like Vanguard, like TSB are trying to, buy out whole fucking villages, right? Or like the landlords I was complaining about on a video the other day. Like, those houses are then going to go into the rental market once they get sold to pay for people's social care. They're not going to go back into the owner-occupier market, thereby further entrenching the entirety of our housing stock into the remit of institutional investors making money hand over fist off people's basic necessities, right? The only things will only get worse.
Top. Yes, there with the short sleeves, yes, you.
I'm not surprised it was Bob Hawke, to be honest. Fucking those years of Hawke and Keating, there's the most embarrassing moment I think I can think of in like Social Democratic Party history outside of maybe the Iraq War for Tony Blair. Like, when you are literally the Labour Party in Australia introducing neoliberalism before the LNP can even get there, I have seething amounts of rage for Hawke and Keating, because without them there'd be no New Labour.
I think on top of trying to find a new house to buy, I think we need regulation on the houses that are being built. There's a lot of houses like Redcratch Quarter, which is literally right by where I live. They're looking to build 850 new homes, and 100 of them are single bed, one bed flats. And I don't know who is at home, like someone looking to buy a house who wants to buy a single bed, one bed flat, and that could still be going forward. So they're hitting their affordable housing targets, but I don't know who.
Well, I don't know. Maybe, I mean, would that be interesting to you, Melissa? At least you'd own it.
Well, the thing is, actually, the issue really isn't about affordable housing being a one-bed flat. The issue is that affordable houses aren't fucking affordable houses, and the planning restrictions that you have to build certain mixes of stuff rather than just building like gigantic, huge amounts of high-density housing. That's the real issue here. That's the real problem.
Instead of renting it, would you consider buying something like that?
I'm not sure.
Right.
It would be what I was hoping to buy.
Right, there you go. So, no, it wouldn't appeal to someone like you. Okay, well, Emily?
I mean, I think also we have a background of the highest inflation rate that we've had for 40 years, and that's another problem. And with household incomes, crashing as well, it makes it increasingly difficult. But, in the end, in my view, the only way that we're going to be able to get the younger generation onto the housing market is to build more houses. Now, that's what we need to do, and it's difficult, because I tell you what, whenever there's a planning application for more houses, there's lots of people in the area turn up to the planning meeting in order to say they don't want to have the houses, but the 25-year-olds who might have a chance of buying those houses, unfortunately, aren't there, saying to the councillors, actually, we need to have these homes,
so
because we, the younger generation, are being left behind.
How do you get around that? Because the government tried to introduce a policy where it would be easier to build houses, despite people's objections, and so many Conservatives objected, they dropped it pretty damn pronto.
Well,
so what would Labour...
Like, we're literally at the point at which, the electoral stuff works out in such a way that the only way that young people are going to get on the housing ladder is wait for the boomers to die off and to stop voting against new housing construction projects in their area. Until the NIMBY vote goes, this is going to be a completely politically toxic policy to try and push through.
I'm not answerable to the
No, I know, but I'm just saying
because Tories are not,
but the point is, it can be hard when you've got lots of people rejecting. How do you get around that? What's your plan for that?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be strong about this, and you have to be clear that actually there is
make it harder for people to reject.
Intergenerational injustice going on, right? There's the older generation, like myself, those of us who essentially hold on to the levers of power, and we're the ones who are looking after ourselves, and a younger generation who are being overlooked. That's the point, and we need to kind of have and anyone who's under 25 who thinks it's a good idea not to vote, I mean, really, they should be much angrier than they are.
But how do you make it easier, Emily, to build more houses, which clearly is a Labour policy, when, as you say, when new housing proposals are put in, lots of people object to them? How does Labour get around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to look again at the planning regulations. Of course we do, and we have to look, as I say, look to the future, and not just sort of short-termism and kind of, as the Conservatives are doing. The Conservatives might have an idea, and then you get, 20 of them saying boo, and the Prime Minister runs away. I mean,
we said to the Villiers Amendment, we were literally entirely beholden to a very small amount of NIMBYs in Theresa Villiers' specific constituency that nixed the idea of the planning regulations modifications in the Levelling Up bill.
I mean, that's what's going on, so we need to have, a bit of vision and a bit of kind of idea that we do need to look after the younger generation. We need to build more houses, and frankly, the older generation need to get their heads around that quick.
You need to persuade Labour councils to do that as well. I mean, the thing is, I think this is something which happens, sure, but national governments can say we want lots of houses. Every national government pretty much does. It's with local government, they tend to put a spanner in the works. Here in Bristol Council, for example, only a few months ago they voted not to reject the government's more ambitious house building agenda. They said, no, we don't want this. We want, I can't think they mentioned environmentalism or something. And I think Bristol, this is particularly acute around here. House prices here are very, expensive. I've got family here. I've got an 18-year-old niece who's here tonight. And what are her chances of, like Hannah, being able to buy a house? Especially when you pick up a local press here, every time somebody wants to do a housing development, there are protests galore. Absolutely, every time and time and time again. And it seems to be there's an imbalance here. In general elections, people say, yes, we want more houses. But when it comes to, on a local basis, the NIMBYs seem to speak more loudly than young people. And I mean, Emily's absolutely right in what she says about we need to build more houses. But we need Labour councils to be saying, yes, we need to build more houses, to do everything they can to help the provision of that. We need Tory councils. We need... Well, no, the thing is, this isn't...
Well, the problem is that there's a massive disconnect in that the Labour councils are predominantly full of younger people who do want more houses because they don't have the financial incentive to want to maintain high house prices in the area because none of them are homeowners. So and the Conservative councils are all very older, so they always block all the planning regulations. So we just continually have more and more and more and more housing being continually built up in the same inner city areas of Labour councils, and no additional housing get built in the Conservative housing. This is inherently fucking unfair, right? That's the real issue here.
Party political issue, but the councils in general are way more swayed by NIMBY voices than they are by people like Hannah.
My Labour council tries to build houses wherever they can. The joke in my constituency is if you move your car in the morning, you come back, there's a flat there. I mean, we really are trying to build as much as we can.
Well,
because
I think everybody can accuse Bristol Council of taking that view.
Exactly.
The man there in the green top.
That's exactly what happens. And Emily Thornberry is right. Like, the reason why it's all happening in the Islington councils is because this is the only way where the political will is, because there's a gigantic disconnect between the material interests of the people who live in the rural constituencies and the one who lives in the inner city constituencies. And it's exactly what I say every single time. The demographic shift, where we've seen all the young people move out of the ex-manufacturing areas into inner cities, that's the only place where the jobs are. And so the material interests are continually diverging further and further and further as these demographic shifts continue.
I think it's not just the importance of house prices, but also like rent as well. When I first moved to Bristol 2 years ago, I paid £500 a month rent. I now nearly pay £700 a month rent for the same room, and I think there needs to be some type of regulation.
And there's talk of rent controls, aren't there, here as well? The council's thinking of that, and that would make the problem a lot worse. Everywhere it's been tried, rent controls makes it worse.
But that's why the Renters Reform Bill is so important, because at the moment, Section 21 evictions mean that landlords can kick you out just so that they can put the rent up by an enormous amount, and there's no long-term secure tenancy. So this Renters Reform Bill is really important so that we can ban those evictions, those no-fault evictions, and bring in longer-term sort of free...
I am not a fan of rent controls. I'm a fan of landlord controls.
...year tenancies, so that doesn't happen. And the government have said they'll do it, and frankly, I don't know what they're waiting for.
OK. Well, Melissa wants to buy her own home, though. That's what she wants, Danny.
Well, I think there's something that links all three of the questions we've been talking about today, about whether it's migration, climate change or housing. And we've got a political system in which short-termism trumps long-termism, in which self-interest...
And where swing voters are the only votes that matter. That's the key issue.
The lady up there was talking about symptoms and causes of migration. You know, tonight, 800 million people will go to bed hungry around the world, and yet our government is cutting the aid budget. Mobility and the factors that drive it are long-term and are going to get worse. We need long-term solutions. Climate change, the young man here who was calling for more ambitious targets by 2030, while politicians are arguing about who are we going faster than with. Are we doing as much as we can to deliver intergenerational justice? And the same goes for housing. We're scared to tackle inequality. Those who happen to have wealth are seeing their wealth accumulate at greater rates than we've seen in history, but young people can't get on the property ladder. We need a political system...
I love it. I love it. The entire British public go, yes, we applaud this. It's majority Conservative voting area. Yes, brilliant. We want redistributive economics. Oh, hi, I'm Jeremy Corbyn. I'd like to use redistributive economics, please. Anti-Semite, terrorist sympathiser, complete ideological evisceration of this, this Trotskyist, Marxist, Leninist, communist, pinko scum. Get out of my world. I'm losing my tiny fucking mind. I honestly, these people. So stupid.
Andrew, how are you going to help Melissa get on the property ladder?
Melissa, I want you to have your own home. I think it's an aspiration.
Well, not half as much as she does. How are you going to help?
I've got 5 children about your age, and I live this experience, and I'm with you. I'm from the party that introduced right to buy, and the reason for that...
I am indeed going to have to tap the sign, Ling Ling. They got what they fucking wanted. You literally got what you fucking wanted.
The reason that was a good thing is it gave people, for the first time in generations, the kind of thing that a lot of us in this room will have just taken for granted. So the aspiration is a correct one. We've built 2.2 million houses since 2010. I have lived the experience.
Yeah, but you're way off target in terms of meeting your target
so
of 300,000.
I deal with all this, and Emily is quite...
Okay, but so how do you help her? I was quite some time ago.
I need to make this point because it's the lived experience of all constituency MPs. The reason we got the 2.2 million is because we have lived in a target-driven environment. That's what's driven these. But locally, it means that we have to face down sometimes vociferous opposition from people who don't want these houses on their doorstep. But you go...
Tell them to go fuck themselves. You're the government. You have the power. You have the power to tell these people to go and shove it. You have the power to tell these people they're being NIMBY fuckers and they need to put up or shut up.
Around my constituency and 650 up and down this country, you'll see building going on right now. But it's not fast enough.
And the government's dropped the compulsory targets now.
Part of it is the way that landowners and developers are gaming the system. And I think that's a great unspoken problem in this. We need to deal with that. I accept it. It's a fair challenge. And I suspect each one of us politicians, each one of our parties, running up to the next general election, are going to have something that's going to convince you to vote for us. And we're not there yet. But your aspiration's the right one. I want you to own your home. I'm confident you will. We've all got a job to do, because I don't suppose any of us have given you a convincing answer tonight to design something that's going to...
Literally, again, exactly what I was saying before, just like, oh, I can't believe... I've only just noticed that young people have very few economic opportunities in this country. And then just like, the 4 years of mass youth-led politics in this country just completely fucking ignored it. Completely ignored it.
Work for you.
So from what you've heard, are you confident that you will?
Not entirely.
Right, OK. We hear you. Let's take another question from Anne McConville. There you are.
What action would you take to stop juvenile knife crime, vandalism and substance abuse?
So, only this week, the Prime Minister has announced his anti-social behaviour action plan, which aims to tackle all of those, plus a few other things as well. Fraser, what action would you take?
Every 5 years or so, each government goes through the same kind of convulsion to crack down on antisocial behaviour, and it's these, the various things. They're going to ban laughing gas. I think that was the latest thing. I mean, and it's they never seem to be very persuasive. But when it comes to things like substance abuse, I don't quite regard that as antisocial behaviour. I see that more as social breakdown. That's more of you talking about what can you do we're talking there about people who live in the margins of society. What can you do to support families, broken families? What can you do to help people who aren't employed get into society? That's
it's not just people like that who are kids of people like that.
Well, but if you look overwhelmingly, if you look at substance abuse, for example, this is problems of. It's not. There's a very big difference between that and between, I don't know, I mean, disorder on the corner of the streets. So I think I wouldn't categorise that as antisocial behaviour necessarily. I would say that's a problem of a broken society, and we've slipped into that again. So there's a lot more the government can do, I think, to support people in the margins and to think about it systemically. I think that a lot of local authorities have cut back the counselling and the social services they've done over the last 10 years. I think that was a mistake, and I think quite a lot of the time there's nobody you can go to for help now, far less than you were able to 10, 15 years ago. So there you can see the edges of our society starting to fray in a very alarming way. And I don't see it as a law and order crackdown. I don't think any kind of law and order crackdown are going to help the sort of problems that you talk about.
Danny.
Wow. Fucking hell. Fraser Nelson said something correct. That we aren't going to get anything from just, like, law and order crackdowns on policies that are based upon deprivation and austerity and a failure of complete failure and breakdown of our communities and of mental health issues. They need real baseline systemic solutions, which over-policing is not going to fix. I can't believe I have to agree with him on that.
I agree with Fraser. We need to invest in our public services. Everywhere that Oxfam works around the world, we find the best way to reduce poverty is to provide people with a safety net. Invest in education, invest in health, allow those people who are living on the margins of your society a route to a better life. And yet in this country, it's a tragedy that the sorts of issues we deal with in other parts of the world, we're having to talk about here because we've been underinvesting in the safety net, in social protection. And we talk about a cost of living crisis here, which sounds as if there's some sort of inevitable mechanism, an invisible hand that's, driving inflation. That's not what's happening. We have an inequality crisis. We are...
This guy's so fucking based.
The money should come from investing more
so
in these
based.
businesses.
Well, we need to...
Is it higher taxes? What we use?
Yes, we've had very historically low levels of taxes on, say, wealth.
We're paying the highest level of tax we've paid since the Second World War, I think.
On income, but not wealth.
we've had cuts.
Not the rich, you're saying.
And on wealth taxes, you know, the returns to wealth in the last few years, in the last few decades across the world, have far outstripped the returns to labour. Last year, 1.7
This guy's been watching Gary's Economics.
billion workers in the world had their wages grow slower than prices, which meant that they're worse off as a result of what's happening. That's happening not because of some sort of global phenomenon. It's happening because of deliberate policy choices not to protect those who are vulnerable, not to raise the minimum wage, not to tax the wealthy.
Okay.
Like, literally, yeah, you're clapping this now. You had the option of voting for this in 2017 and 2019, and you didn't. You got what you fucking wanted. Every time. Every fucking time.
The man in the corner there, yes, in the black top, black jacket.
Good evening. Surely the situation starts with community policing, Fiona. You had a police officer, I think, on your last show, was almost in tears, telling us there's no community policing at all these days. They're all being diverted into other crimes. And I just think if we got more community police, we can start dealing with these issues.
Okay. And the woman there in the green top and the glasses.
Yeah, I'm staggered, to be honest, at the gap between the audience and the panel, and the notion that you think that you're succeeding on green energy, or that people support human beings washing up on our shores or being deported to Rwanda. I'm absolutely staggered. The way that we talk about serious youth violence is not to talk about crime, it's to talk about the trauma that they've actually experienced in the last 2 years. You have cut funding, you've cut budgets in school. We can't recruit teachers, we can't recruit teaching assistants. You've cut social workers. You have cut local services to the bone. And then you're worried about antisocial behaviour. There are no youth services. There are no youth services. I'm absolutely...
Yeah, they applaud this stuff. Again, you had the option of changing this in 2017 and 2019. Did you vote for it? Did you fuck? Right? You got what you wanted.
There is so clearly a gap. There is such a...
Obviously, this woman is based, and she probably did actually vote for Jeremy Corbyn, so I will give her the benefit of the doubt. But the rest of the audience are all applauding it, and we know this is a majority Conservative audience. Yet they continue to support the literal evil party that does all of this, that caused all of these literal problems. This is what you wanted.
Massive gap between what you're saying and people's experience. Why can't people buy a house? Look at their wages. They're a teacher, they have been through university, paid over 30 grand, if not more, to go to university. This ideological. Want to control rent? Use rent control. Want to have houses? Build more houses, because you can find the money to build HS2 and drill through. These are ideological choices. You've done nothing for green energy in 13 years. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So I think when we're talking about young people and supporting them, what has been put in place for young people? A tutoring programme.
OK, let's put some of these points to the Minister.
It's woeful. It is woeful.
You heard the lady.
Right, my job's over. Right, come on, green shirt lady. Right, do you wanna a job? Being a political streamer? It's there for you. Fuck it. I'd sub.
The original question was about knife crime.
Well, and there's a substance abuse, but you've heard two people here and from the audience also talking about, well,
in the time you give me, Fiona,
what action will you take? And they're suggesting not cutting services might be part of the action you could take.
Okay, in terms of knife crime and antisocial behaviour, because they're part of the same spectrum, it's all crime. But serious crime has come down quite a lot. 50% since 2010, except for fraud. And the gentleman is absolutely right.
Why would you leave out fraud? I don't understand
because what's
if you put fraud in, it's crime.
What happens is the criminals have become invisible, and it touches.
But that doesn't mean they shouldn't be part of the statistics.
No, but it touches on the point about community policing, because although we've recruited 16,000 policemen, what people say to me is they want visible policing, but those policemen.
Police officer. What made you want to become a policeman officer?
Are tackling online fraud. That's where the criminals
No, they're not.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
Not.
Online fraud is a calumny because it affects the most vulnerable. It affects the elderly and
you
those
have 1,000 police officers dealing with fraud.
Less robust.
You have 8,000.
Hang on, let Moss, then I'll let you.
So it's vital that we do deal with fraud. I'm very grateful to the gentleman for mentioning it. But a 50% cut since 2010 is a real achievement.
Hang on, but I'm really confused. If fraud is such a calumny, Why are you not including it in the figures?
Those are the published figures. So those figures are excluded.
So if you include fraud, crime has gone up.
No, it won't have gone up.
Well, hang on.
Is it bad? Is it bad that I'm genuinely feeling sorry for this guy right now? Like, genuinely feeling sorry for this guy he's just a random fucking defence minister. He's not in charge of the budget. He's not in charge of obviously he's voted for Australia. Obviously he's a Tory, so he's a bell end, right? I'm not saying that he's a good person because obviously he's a Tory. But, you know, it's clear that he has his priorities at least marginally in order as in comparison to like other Tories, and he's not got a lot of the actual levers at his hands to be able to change any of this stuff. And he's basically been thrown to the fucking lions because he's been fucking destroyed. He's been torn apart. Fraser Nelson is beating this guy up from the left. Like, that's literally how pathetic, you know, the record of this government is, that anybody who gets put out to genuinely incisive questioning about their record in government is going to get completely embarrassed and humiliated. And I genuinely feel sorry for this guy.
It's gone down.
Well, when the Conservative, I thought you might mention this. When the Conservative government came into power, there were just over 4 million recorded crimes. It is now 6.3 million. So, and there are different ways of recording crime. In fairness, I get that, but that's according to the Office for National Statistics. So I just thought I'd put that in there. What action would you take to stop juvenile knife crime, vandalism, and substance abuse, Emily?
Can I talk about fraud for a moment? Just
very briefly. I've only got 4 minutes left, and I've got to get Helen in as well.
40% of crime is fraud. 1,000 police officers are dealing with fraud. You have 8,000 people in the Department of Work and Pensions dealing with fraud. I mean, that is the priorities. You know, we are not dealing with fraud properly, and we don't even record attempted fraud. So if someone tries to have a go at you, and you ring up action fraud, they won't even record it because it's an attempted fraud, and therefore not a fraud, and therefore they don't bother to record it. So, you know, the amount of crime that's actually going on, and the last lot of statistics that were published, I think were published 6 years ago, on the amount of money that we think that we lost in this country as a result of fraud, and it was £198 billion. And that is the amount of money we spent on the National Health Service in the first year of the pandemic. So, you know, the idea that the Tories can talk about, you know, crime going down when they're overlooking £198 billion worth of crime is quite extraordinary, in my view.
And just listen briefly, because I must bring Helen in. What action would you take to stop... Let's deal with Anne's question. She's asked it. What action would you take to stop juvenile knife crime, vandalism and stuff?
So there's very quickly. So we would reintroduce the PCSOs, the community police officers that we've been talking about, because no community can have policing done to it. You have to work with police officers, and that's the way in which you make a community safe. And the community's priorities then become...
The thing is, you say this is how Tories do it, change the topic to the thing they do least worst, having been incisively questioned on something and then only answer the bit of the question you actually want to answer. You say this is how Tories do it, which obviously I agree, it is a very Tory thing to do. What's quite amusing is that was one of the key things that Blair was really good at doing, and why he was such a kind of firebrand in politics, is he was so good at only answering the questions that he wanted to answer. It's almost like, folks, it's almost like Blair was a Tory. Shock horror.
The police officers' priorities because they work closely with that community. We have to spend, and we, Labour, would spend £1 billion on mental health, and we will be putting mental health workers in the schools. Every secondary school would have a mental health worker, and all primary schools would have one that they would...
It is a neoliberal thing, but it's a career politician thing. It's what career politicians learn to do, and they get taught how to do it. It's just, it was only really the case for a long time that Tories were just the people who were the career politicians because that's where you made the money. But ever since the advent of New Labour are now the pro-business party. So there's plenty of money to be had being a career politician in the Labour Party too, especially now that we have very centralised two-party politics.
Would be sharing, so that we can deal with those issues as well. We would stop the way in which you can buy knives so easily online.
I've got a list. I thought Helen is not going to get a word in it. Just thinking, I must let Helen have a chance as well.
Well, I think that's a good question, and I think we need to split out low-level antisocial behaviour, knife crime, and substance abuse, because I think they're all quite different things. I'm not going to repeat what Danny and Fraser said about substance abuse because I broadly agree with them. On low-level antisocial behaviour, it does ruin people's lives when they feel unsafe to go out. I think the lack of community support officers is a real problem. The number of visible police officers on the street has fallen, and locally people will tell you they haven't seen an officer, they can't be bothered to report a crime because no one turns up. And ultimately, you're not being tough on crime if nobody even bothers to report one in the first place. Knife crime, I think, is much more problematic. I think youth services are critical to that, and I think the hollowing out of local council budgets that we've seen since 2015, £2 billion cut from local council budgets, 35% reduction in some cases, is what's at the bottom of that problem with youth and some of the types of crime that they turn to.
Okay, I've got about a minute left. Let's hear from the woman there. Yes, you. No, yes, there.
crime and poverty are interlinked, and the poorest in our society have been getting poorer and poorer. And one of the things that I notice is when parents are stressed, that sort of impacts on the children, and that's where we have to tackle things. It's within the families, because children aren't born criminals, but when their parents are sort of struggling with just basic, trying to survive, and they don't have the time to look after their children, then we're creating more and more problems. And that's
literally, we have a more politically informed audience than we do actual politicians in this country. It's the state that we're in. It's the fucking pathetic state that we're in.
Bring back the show stuff.
Exactly. Pay people better and respect them, and I wish this government would stop vilifying the most vulnerable in society. It's all it's going to What we need is solutions. We need a lot more love in our society, a lot more care.
A lot more love. More love on the panel, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, thank you for your point.
Take the Marianne Williamson pill. Take the Orb pill.
Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much.
That was an absolute banger episode. I am 100% having to edit this one because the stream dropped midway through and then my face disappeared. So I do apologise, future YouTube viewers, for the kind of slapdash product that you'll be watching on the back end. But my God, this was an amazing episode. Oh, the Tory got clowned on so bad. Oh, wonderful. I do hope you guys clipped. Although you chat to then, I do hope you guys clipped loads of bits of that, because that's some TikTok content right there. Right there. Oh, perfect. Love it, love it. And if you enjoyed my incisive commentary, you can subscribe on Twitch for $3.99, or you become a member on YouTube for 99p. Or you can drop bits, you can donate, you can become a patron. If you want to contribute, that would be great, but is never expected. And I'll catch you on the next one.